A ship arrived at Annapolis Harbor on September 29, 1767. Its name was the Lord Ligonier. Of the 140 Africans forced aboard in chains, only 98 survived the journey. 42 had perished during the crossing. Among the living was a 17-year-old Mandinka warrior. For the next 55 years, he would wage a silent, solitary war, a war to remember his name. The official records from Spotsylvania County, Virginia, show only this: a slave purchased that October, given the name Toby. But the records lie. What those cold ledgers deliberately omit, and what family Bibles would never acknowledge, was a calculated campaign to annihilate more than a man's freedom. Its goal was to erase his very identity and the living memory of an entire culture. This is not a story of a slave named Toby. This is the story of how one African, against all odds, forged the brutality meant to shatter him into a legacy that would outlive his captors. What you are about to hear was buried under 2 centuries of silence. The truth is far more harrowing than the simplified tale you think you know. Before the name Toby, there was a name that meant complete. To understand the man, you must first know where he began. Our knowledge comes from sources that took nearly 200 years to surface. The Gambia River sliced through West Africa like a deep, unhealed scar. For slave traders, it was a watery highway, carrying British ships further inland than any other route. By 1767, the trading fortress on James Island had processed tens of thousands of captured souls. But demand from Virginia's tobacco plantations was insatiable. Local wars between kingdoms created a harvest of human misery. The British Royal Africa Company paid premium prices for one specific commodity: young men with the strength and discipline of warriors. 2 miles from the British fort stood the village of Juffier. Here, the Kinte clan were respected blacksmiths and holy men, living under the constant shadow of raids. The Mandinka people had survived for centuries by mastering a dangerous art, appearing cooperative while guarding their traditions in secret. Children learned the rules young: be wary near the river, never go into the forest alone, and run at the first sight of the slates. African slave catchers working for European money. A blacksmith named Amaro Kinte knew the dangers intimately. He had seen the iron shackles he was forced to mend. He had heard the whispers of villages emptied in the night. He taught his eldest son not only the skills of a blacksmith and drum maker, but a cruel practicality. A young man who could craft instruments might be kept alive on a slave ship to maintain morale among the dying. That son's name was Kunta Kinte. In Mandinka tradition, the name carried the weight of a destiny. Kunta meant complete, whole. It was a name for firstborn sons destined to carry a legacy. At 17, Kunta had finished his manhood training. He could hunt with a spear and recite his family's lineage back 7 generations. The elders saw in him a future leader. One morning in July 1767, Kunta entered the forest near Juffier to gather a specific hardwood for drum making. The grove was 3 miles out, a distance that was dangerous but familiar. He carried no weapon. This was sacred ground. He moved with the quiet confidence of one walking paths known since childhood. He did not know that British Colonel O'Hare had arrived at James Island 3 days prior, under orders to secure a massive shipment of human cargo for Virginia. The Lord Ligonier sat anchored offshore, its captain desperate to fill its hold with 140 captives before the weather turned. For professional slates had been tracking Kunta since he left the village. They were experts in the art of the ambush. The attack was a swift, terrifying silence. A wooden club struck Kunta's shoulder from behind, driving him to his knees. Hands clamped over his mouth, others pinned his arms. In less than 90 seconds, they bound his wrists, wrapped cloth over his eyes and mouth, and dragged him away. Kunta Kinte, a free man, had become merchandise. The system of shattering. He was dragged to a temporary pen by the river, where 24 other captives sat chained. The shock was universal. The mind could not process the sudden transformation from person to property. For 3 days, he was broken in. Minimal food and water. Beating sun by day, chilling cold by night. Guards punished any noise. The lesson was calculated. Resistance equals pain. Submission is the only path to survival. When the Lord Ligonier's crew came, they brought a ship's surgeon, Dr. Thompson. His job was inspection, not healing. He examined teeth, felt muscles, and peered into eyes with the detached evaluation of a man assessing livestock. Of 32 captives presented, he rejected 7. Kunta Kinte, 17, strong, and fit from blacksmith work, passed. The British paid the slates in rum, textiles, and iron bars. Kunta was now listed on a manifest. Male, approximate 17 years. Mandinka origin. The transfer to the ship was a practiced routine of terror. Small boats carried captives, still shackled, to the towering vessel. Kunta's first sight of the Lord Ligonier revealed the horrific scale of the operation. This was no random crime. It was a refined, industrial machine. Below deck was a vision of hell. The slave deck was only 5 feet high, forcing all to crouch or lie. Each person was allotted a space 16 inches wide and 6 feet long, just enough to lie flat. The air was thick, hot, and foul. Kunta was shackled by the ankle to another man, a stranger named Fanta. Their survival was now literally chained together. The Lord Ligonier set sail on July 5, 1767, with 140 souls in its belly. Captain Davies wrote in his log of his satisfactory cargo. He did not write of the systematic brutality required to maintain it. The Middle Passage, a voyage in death. The journey across the Atlantic, the Middle Passage, was an endless cycle of suffering. Once a day, captives were brought topside for exercise. 30 minutes of forced movement while still chained, a measure meant not for humanity, but to preserve profitable muscle. In these brief moments, Kunta observed the ship's routines. He saw patterns. He listened. Another captive, Cuddy, who understood some English, learned their destination, Naples, which the Mandinka heard as Annapolis. They were to be sold for work on tobacco plantations. The British expected most to be dead within a decade. Discussions of rebellion simmered, but the mathematics of horror were clear. Shackles against muskets and cutlasses meant suicide. Then, the weather of suffering changed to literal storm. A violent Atlantic tempest struck. For 4 days, the ship was tossed violently. Seawater and waste sloshed together in a toxic soup across the slave deck, soaking the chained captives. No food or water was brought down. Men screamed until their voices gave out, convinced they would drown in the dark. When the storm cleared, Dr. Thompson descended. 18 more captives were dead. The bodies were thrown overboard. Kunta's shacklemate, Fanta, had developed a fever. He apologized to Kunta before he died. Kunta then spent 18 hours chained to Fanta's corpse before it was removed. The isolation and trauma began to dissolve the minds of many. Memories of home blurred. Languages faded. The British didn't need to actively erase identities. The conditions did it for them. It was here, in the deepest pit of this nightmare, that Kunta Kinte found his first weapon, memory. Each morning, silently, he recited his full lineage. I am Kunta Kinte, son of Amaro Kinte, grandson of Karaba Kunta Kinte, of the Kinte clan of Jufure. He recalled his father's teachings, the taste of his mother's cooking, the smell of the African earth. His name was his fortress. As long as he remembered it, a part of him remained free. On September 29, 1767, the Lord Ligonier entered Annapolis harbor. 42 were dead. 98 were left. A cargo of choice, healthy slaves. An advertisement ran in the Maryland Gazette. Just imported a cargo of choice, healthy slaves. The 42 dead were not mentioned. The survivors were prepared for market like damaged goods being shined up. At the auction near the docks, a Virginia planter named John Waller examined Kunta. He saw a strong teenage male, no obvious disease. When Kunta met his eyes directly, a sign of defiance, Waller mistook it for intelligence. The bid was quick. The transaction was recorded. One Negro male, approximately 17 years old. John Waller now held a bill of sale and a piece of property he would call Toby. The 3-day journey to Waller's Spotsylvania County plantation was a crash course in dehumanization. Communication was through gesture and violence. At the plantation, the overseer, Connolly, pointed at Kunta and said his new name, Toby. Kunta pointed to himself and replied, Kunta Kinte. The fundamental war was declared. Connolly struck him. Toby. Kunta Kinte. Another blow. Kunta Kinte. It was not a failure to understand. It was a refusal to surrender. John Waller decided on a public lesson in obedience. Kunta was tied to a post in view of every other slave. He was whipped with methodical precision. After each lash, Waller asked, "What is your name?" Each time, through gritted teeth, Kunta gasped, "Kunta Kinte." He was whipped until he lost consciousness, but he never once uttered the name Toby. The calculus of escape and mutilation. Kunta learned the brutal work of tobacco fields. But his mind, trained as a blacksmith to observe detail, learned the plantation's routines, its rhythms, its weaknesses. In January 1768, he made his first escape. He followed a creek bed north, hoping waterways led to the ocean. He was found within hours by professional slave catchers with dogs. The punishment was a brutal, public beating. He tried again in May 1768, better prepared. He lasted 3 days and covered 20 miles before the dogs found him. John Waller had had enough. Standard punishment had failed. The economic logic was cold. A slave who couldn't run was a slave who could still work. He ordered a standard deterrent for persistent escapees, the amputation of half the right foot. Waller's brother, Dr. William Waller, performed the surgery in a tool shed. No anesthetic. Kunta was tied down and held still. It was state-sanctioned torture, a permanent modification of property. The amputation achieved its goal. Kunta would never run again. But it created an unintended legend. The story of the African who refused his name, who escaped twice, and who endured mutilation rather than submit, spread through the whispered networks connecting enslaved communities. He became a symbol: love, legacy, and theft. During a long, painful recovery, Kunta learned more from the older enslaved people. He saw the complex strategies of survival, secret faith, hidden kinship, quiet sabotage. As a driver for Dr. Waller, who had purchased him from his brother, Kunta entered the white world. He saw his enslavers not as cartoon monsters, but as ordinary people who attended church and loved their families, all while presiding over a system of absolute brutality. This normalized evil was, in some ways, more terrifying. He formed a relationship with Belle, the plantation cook. She was Virginia-born, bridging African memory and American survival. In 1773, they had a daughter. Kunta named her Kizzy, a Mandinka word meaning "you stay put," a desperate father's plea against the system that stole children. He held his infant daughter and spoke to her in Mandinka. He told her of her grandfather Amaro, of the village of Juffier, of the river Gambia. He taught her words that connected her to a world beyond the fence posts. Belle, fearful of the danger, also taught Kizzy how to navigate the white world. Kizzy grew, and a terrifying opportunity arose. The master's young niece, Missy, befriended her and, innocently, taught her to read and write, a crime punishable by death or sale for an enslaved person. This secret literacy became a weapon when Kizzy, as a teenager in love with an enslaved man named Noah, used it to forge a traveling pass for his escape. The escape failed. The forged pass was discovered. The handwriting was traced. Dr. Waller's response was swift and merciless. Within 24 hours, to prevent any intervention, 16-year-old Kizzy was sold to a trader headed for North Carolina. For Kunta and Belle, this was the ultimate defeat. They could endure beatings, mutilation, and backbreaking labor. But the theft of their child was an agony that broke something unbreakable: the long silence. Kunta lived on, growing old. Belle died in 1810. He worked until his body gave out. In 1822, at approximately 70 years of age, the man named Kunta Kinte died on the plantation where he had been enslaved for 55 years. The record read, Toby, age approximate 70, died of natural causes. No Africa, no Middle Passage, no escapes, no amputated foot, no stolen daughter. Just a line in a ledger noting the depletion of inventory. But the name did not die. Kizzy, in North Carolina, survived. She had a son, George, who earned his freedom. George had children, who had children. The story of the warrior who never forgot his name was kept alive. It passed from Kizzy to George, down through 7 generations in an unbroken chain of memory, a quiet victory against the system designed to annihilate it. In the 1960s, a descendant named Alex Haley, armed with this oral history, traced the story back across the ocean to the village of Juffier, where a griot, an oral historian, still remembered the story of the young man named Kunta Kinte, captured around 1767 and never seen again. Haley's book, Roots, seared this truth into the global consciousness. The uncomfortable truth. The horror of Kunta Kinte's story is not that it was unique. It is that it was ordinary. Hundreds of thousands endured similar fates. His legacy is not one of triumphant freedom, but of tenacious identity. They could take his body, his labor, his foot, and his child, but they could not take his name. And in that refusal, he secured a form of freedom that outlasted his captors. This story forces a confrontation with an American foundation built on a specific, systematic brutality. It reminds us that the country which declared all men are created equal did so while operating the largest slave society in the Western world. The echoes of that contradiction are not ancient history. They are the very ground we walk on today. This is the story they tried to bury under the name Toby. Remember his real name. Remember Kunta Kinte.